Hi everyone, I'm Lisa from IDreaminSoap. Welcome to my channel and thanks for stopping by. Today I'm making a 9-layered soap and I'm hoping that each one of those layers is going to be beautifully straight with no wobbly bobbly bits or any of the layers above breaking down into the layers below. The colour scheme I'm using is lime greens and yellows and greys, and I'm hoping it's going to go really well with the fragrance oil. I've chosen to use Avobath today, and it's one of my favourite fragrance oils. It's so citrusy and bright and fresh. It's really lovely. I'm also going to be adding an extra element, and you're going to see that in the video. So come on, let's go and make some soap. So to start off, you can see I've got just a tiny weeny amount of oil, and that's lye sitting there in that little stainless steel jug. And what I'm doing here is they've been made up for a little while and they've got down to room temperature, which is too low for me to soap at. So therefore I've just sat them in a little pot of some warm water, and I'm just gradually bringing them up to the temperature that I like, which is always soaping between 80 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, as you can probably tell, this is a really small amount of oil, and that's because I'm just using it to make an embed for my layered soap. And what I'm intending on doing is pouring a layer in the base of a soap mould, and then I'm going to flip it up 90 degrees so it forms a vertical stripe through the horizontal stripes that I'm making. Now I've already pre-mixed the micas that I'm using in a little bit of oil, and I'm just popped them straight into these little diddly squeeze bottles that I've got. Now I'll go over what micas I'm using in the next part of the video. They're the same ones throughout the soap. Now what I want here is I want my sort of vertical stripe that I'm going through to be patterned. I want it to be mottled with all the different colours going through the rest of the soap. So therefore I'm taking my tiny weeny little bit of soap and I'm pouring it into 3 tiny weeny small little proportions, and then I'm going to use those to make sort of like a squiggly layer for the base. These are very small amounts of soap batter, so therefore I'm only going to need a very tiny bit of fragrance oil. Therefore I'm using my really tiny detailed scale and a pipette just to get the right amount into each bit. Once that's done, I'm just going to seal them up and give them a good shake, and then I'm ready to pour. Now I know sometimes it can be a bit of a pain with squeeze bottles that you end up getting a little bit of batter stuck in them, which if you're doing small amounts is actually quite annoying. So this is my favourite tool for dealing with this. It's called a mini spoon, and it comes from a company called Dream Farm. I think they're all over the place in the UK and the US and whatever, and it's just fantastic because it's bendy, it gets around the corners of the neck of a squeeze bottle, and it's also nice and scoopy as well, so therefore better than a spatula, you can actually pull quite big amounts out and completely clean out your squeeze bottle, so it's really brilliant. And then once we're all poured, just giving it a nice little tap down, and I'm going to cover it. I'm going to try as hard as I can to get this to go through gel. It's a really tiny thin little layer though, so I may struggle with it. So I am going to put some cling wrap over it and sort of drop that into the mould as low as I possibly can, wrap it up and then pop it in the oven at 75 degrees centigrade, 170 degrees Fahrenheit, just to see if I can force gel on this. So the next day it's ready to unmould, and what you will see is, can you see that I've now pushed cling film right across the top of it? As soon as it was firm enough, I've closed that cling film down on it because I don't want it to get too hard. I want it to stay sort of as moist as possible so that it really seats well with the rest of the soap. So I'm just going to unmould this, and then I'm going to wrap it back in that film again to try and stop it from drying out too much. And now just moving on to the main body of the soap. Now the colours I've used, both for the embed and the main body of the soap, are Antique Silver from Mica Mama, Lime from You Make It Up, and then a combination of Neon Yellow and Sunshine Yellow from Mica Mama. I'm just adding the neon to the yellow to give it a little bit of a punch, because yellows can tend to dull a little bit when they actually go through gel. I pre-mix all of my micas with a little bit of extra oil just to prepare them before putting them in the soap batter. Now I've got the rest of the oils from the batch that I need to make my loaf, and I'm dividing it out into 3 different parts because I've got 3 colours that I'm going to be using in my soap. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the colouring into the oils now so that I get a consistent colour all the way through the soap. So all my greens, all my yellows, all my greys will all be exactly the same tone because I've coloured the underlying oils for them. Now when you do this, it's great because it does make it nice and consistent when you get the same colour throughout the soap, but you do need to watch. It can actually be quite a bit harder to spot when you've emulsified your oils when you've actually got the colouring in them. So I'm now just going to put the embed into my mould, and I'm just making sure that I get it as central as I can, because when I pour my layers in, I obviously want them to be even each side. So I'm just lining everything up and then checking top and bottom as well. Now when you're trying to decide how thin you want to make your layers, it's a good idea to take account of the minimum amount of batter you can blend successfully. So here what I'm just doing is just showing you that by using a jug and filling it with some coloured water, I can see for me to cover the head of my stick blender, I'd need just over 300 grams of batter, and that's not a particularly thin layer. However, if you just do something simple like swap to a smaller container to do your blending in, that will mean you can get a thinner layer. And if you've got a mini blender, you can actually get a much smaller amount of batter blended successfully. So now you know the number of layers you want, you can take your total oil weight and divide that by that number of layers, and that will tell you how much oil per layer. And then you need to do exactly the same for your lye. Now it's quite likely you're going to be working in very small amounts here, so accurate measurement is really vital. If you're over by a bit, it does make a difference when you're dealing with these small quantities. I like to use my precision scales that I've got here when I'm dealing with these small amounts, and they actually weigh down to a fraction of a gram. And then once you know your quantities, then the process is fairly normal. Just mixing your lye with your oils, bringing to emulsion, adding your fragrance oil and pouring into the mould. Now as you can see here, I'm actually stopping and checking the temperature of my lye. It's actually quite chilly at that 66 degrees, so I'm going to pop it into some water and warm it up. And why that's caused me this problem is because it's actually caused me to hit a false trace. If you have a look, my batter's thickened up quite quickly and it's got that sort of grainy texture to it. Now this is nothing to worry about at all. As long as you just continue to stir, the batter and everything will actually warm up as it acts with the lye, and it will thin out again, and then you can bring it to emulsion. One thing that you mustn't do at this stage is you mustn't think, oh, I've actually got trace, let's go and pop it in the mould, because if you pop it in the mould before it's properly emulsified, it will separate later on. And then once I'm happy that everything's emulsified, I'm going to carefully weigh out my fragrance oil and add it in, and I'm ready to think about pouring everything into the mould. And then just because I've got that embed splitting my loaf down the centre, I'm measuring my 2 parts out evenly and then just going to pour it into my loaf mould. And each time I do a pour, I'm going to check that that embed has stayed up nice and straight because I don't want it throwing off my rows later on. Then it's a good idea to make sure you clean down the sides of your mould, just so you get those nice crisp lines right on the edge of your soap, rather than having all smears and that sort of thing. Once that's done, it just needs to wait to set up until we're ready to pour the next layer. Now it's really important, if you want lovely straight layers, that you don't rush to pour the next layer. You need to be really certain that that first layer is set, and once that's happened, you can then repeat the process with your next colour. Now I've just jumped forward here to layer 6 because I can't imagine anyone wants to sit and watch me go through all 9 layers. So I'm down to a green colour. The reason I've stopped on this layer is because I'm just going to show you how you can tell when a previous layer has set up nicely. So what will happen is that previous layer will lose its sheen. You know how when you pour a soap into a mould it's all nice and shiny? When it's gone a bit duller, then you know that's nice and set up. You don't want to be doing any testing like prodding it with a spoon or sticking your finger in it, because that's going to bend your layer. And then the other important thing to bear in mind is you want to pour at a nice fluid thin trace. You quite often hear people talk about doing layers and saying they want a thick trace because they want it to set up quickly. If you have a thick trace, you won't get a flat layer because it won't just automatically level itself out. So pour it at a thinner trace, something that will even itself out, and then either use a fragrance oil that may accelerate it a little bit more quickly, or just have to wait for it to set up properly. So once I've got all 9 layers poured, I'm just going to treat it as I do with all of my soaps. I'm going to cover it with its lid, seal it with some cling wrap, and then wrap it in a towel. I then pop it in the oven, so at 75 degrees centigrade or 170 degrees Fahrenheit. As soon as I put the soap in, I turn the oven off, and then I leave it to sit there overnight. So the next day it's ready to unmould and cut. Now I'm not going to labour through every single one of these slices of soap because, being a layered soap, they're all going to look pretty well the same. So I'm just going to cut a few bars here, and then I'll leave you with some pictures of the finished soap. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that you like the soap. If you do, it would be great if you gave me a thumbs up and maybe left a comment in the comments section below. If you'd like to see what I'm doing in the future, why not subscribe to my channel? You can do that by either clicking the logo on the screen or hitting the subscribe button below the video. And if you want to be notified every time I release a video, then just click that notification bell. Thanks for watching everybody, and happy soaping!